Rabbi Isaac Homler was a chassid of three Rabbeim, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek. The Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, calls him Harav HaGoen HaAmiti Ish HaAshkoilis, which means Harav, the rabbi, HaGoen HaAmiti is a true genius, and he doesn't write Hey Reish, Hey Gimel. He actually writes out the words Harav HaGoen HaAmiti Ish HaAshkoilis, the man of Ashkel. Eshkel means a cluster. The Gemara interprets the word Eshkel, Ish Asher Kol Bey, a person that had every quality, every good attribute. He was an incredibly gifted chassid, obviously an incredible Goan who completed the Shas every year, and he was actually a B'choyer, he was the firstborn son, so he would complete the Shas every year, and that of Pesach. And his father, who was not a chassid, said, if he's still finishing the Shas once a year, then Chassidus can't be that bad. He was a giant, he really was a giant. But the Alter Rebbe, he was from the Mittel Chassidim, from the middle-aged Chassidim, by the Marash, by the Mittler Rebbe, he was from the older Chassidim, and by the Tzemach Tzedek, he was from the sages. The very first thing that Tzemach Tzedek did when he became a Rebbe was visit him. He wasn't well, he was ill. He lived a very long time. He passed away in Taf Reish Yud Zayin. That's 1857. So he once commented, he said, Bam Rebbe, meaning the Alter Rebbe, when Chassidim said the Alter Rebbe Stam, it meant the Alter Rebbe. The only person, only Rebbe who says Alter Rebbe to mean Alter Rebbe is our Rebbe. Even the Friedrich Rebbe would say Rebbe Stam, it meant the Alter Rebbe. Bam Rebbe is Almol Gven Ruach HaKodesh. The Alter Rebbe always had Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. The Mittler Rebbe, the second Rebbe, had Ruach HaKodesh, Vener had Gewalt whenever he wanted. By dem Rebbe, by the Rebbe Shlita, by the Tzemach Tzedek, is da Ruach HaKodesh von Zeit zu Zeit. He has divine inspiration from time to time. And he concluded, Amol is better nicht haben Ruach HaKodesh. They should sometimes prefer not to have divine inspiration. So the Chassidim or the Tzemach Tzedek, of course, they had an issue with what he said, because who was he to make an earlier Rebbe greater than their Rebbe? So they asked him, do you have Ruach HaKodesh yourself, that you can determine how a Rebbe has and doesn't have Ruach HaKodesh? And he responded by saying, Ruach HaKodesh hab ich nicht, aber am Meven bin ich. I don't have Ruach HaKodesh, but I understand it. I'm an expert. I once told a story in an earlier class in this series, and I explained it to you. I went into a whole long discussion about godliness versus intellect and so forth. I'm telling you the story today to simply bring out this point. A neshama in Gan Eden is saturated with Ruach HaKodesh. Living in the higher realms on high is living in a godly realm. We are completely inspired by divine presence. A neshama in this world has no Ruach HaKodesh, unless, of course, you're the Tzemach Tzedek, or the Alter Rebbe, or the Baal Shem Tov, or the Rashbi, and so forth. But Amol is better nicht haben Ruach HaKodesh. The lack of divine inspiration that we have, of course, is the basis for our free will, our separateness from Hashem, which allows us to become what the Chazal call Shutaf LaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Ma'aseh Bereishis, a partner in God's creation. In the Hayam Raah it says, and the Shoma vat 2,000-3,000 years, a soul will wait 2,000 or 3,000 years to come into this world and live 70 years. At Toivaton ein Yidin Bagashmias. Allah has come and become a Baruchnias, do one Jew one favor materially, and how much more so spiritually. So neshamas there that are saturated with Ruach HaKodesh are vying, are competing, are desperately hoping and wishing to come into this world and, so to speak, forfeit the Ruach HaKodesh. Give it up. Give up that sense of intimacy with Hashem so that they can exercise what one is capable of exercising when they're separate from godliness and God. The Maamar we're going to learn talks about a very, very basic concept in Kabbalah and also in Chassidus called the birth of the Jewish soul, Leidas Neshamas, the birth of Jewish soul. And it links that event, and it says in the Kitzvi Arizal, to Shvi Shal Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach. The Kabbalah is that on Shmini Atzeres, the 8th day of Sukkot, is the Ibur, the beginning of the pregnancy of Neshamas, and on Shvi Shal Pesach is their birth. What this means is very simply this. Everybody knows that when a baby is born, they're first conceived. And then they gestate. They spend 9 months in a protected environment because they cannot protect themselves yet, where they mature and they develop and they grow until they've achieved a degree of self-containment. And then there is an event called birth, which is very dramatic and very painful and very abrupt and very miraculous, because once the baby is born, they have their own self-identity. According to Kabbalah, when a neshama is cold, when a neshama is singled out and removed from Gan Eden and given an opportunity to come into this life and to come into this world, it needs to gestate as well. Because the neshama in Gan Eden is not much different than a point of Zera, which is underdeveloped. It's not a child, it's just a point. It must be expounded and opened up and developed and so forth. So in neshamas, like the biological gestation, there is a mystical, there's a metaphysical gestation where the neshama takes on garments, we would call it, a form, until it's in a position to relate to a body. And this process of ibur, of gestation, is from Sukkot, the 8th day of Sukkot, which is Minat Seres, and it culminates in Shvius Shel Pesach. And I mentioned to you in several of the classes in the previous Maamar that the previous Rebbe said once that by the Rabbeim the happiest day of the year was Shvius Shel Pesach, and my presumption is because this was the day Neshamas Yisrael are born. Now, what is the significance of a Neshama being born? So let's go back to the beginning. What is a Neshama like prior to its birth? Neshamas Yisrael, Jewish souls, like everything else, come from God. And that means, in other words, before they exist as an actual creation in the physical world or in the metaphysical spiritual worlds, it exists in godliness, as one with godliness. Before Hashem creates angels, angels exist in Atzilus. Before Hashem creates the various different worlds that He's later going to create and the many, many different beings that exist within them, they all exist in the realm of Atzilus, in the realm of godliness. And the same is true of a neshama. Neshamas Yisrael exist in Atzilus before they come into the lower realms. But there's a couple of things that are important to mention. Number one, in Atzilus there's a phenomenon called Iyu v'chayei echad, Iyu v'gamay echad. Iyu v'chayei echad, Iyu v'gamay echad means to say that the light and vessels of Atzilus are in a state of dveikis, they're in a state of attachedness to Ein Sof, which is higher than Atzilus. Neshamas Yisrael, even in Atzilus, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Neger Zakei, the Shema Chaf is called Yotzu v'Nifredu. In other words, souls in Atzilus are godly, living in a godly realm, but not in such a state of dveikis with godliness that you could say of them that because they're godly, they're linked to a godliness higher than themselves, namely the Ein Sof, which is higher than Atzilus. In other words, Neshamas of Atzilus, even in a godly state, are in a way standoffish. They're in a way distinct. Right? One of the key ideas that we discuss when we talk about godliness is dveikus. Dveikus means attachedness. My existence is attached to a higher existence, but it's attached to a higher existence still. So the godliness of Atzilus has a dveikus to the godliness which is higher than Atzilus, which is what's called Iyu v'chayei echad, Iyu v'gamay echad. Neshamas Yisrael, even as they are godly, and in Atzilus, don't have that kind of a dveikus. They're godly, they're totally bottled to Hashem, but at the same time, they have a self-contained identity. They have a metzias, a form which is their own, which makes them not dovuk to godliness the way the light and the vessels of Atzilus are dovuk in godliness. Basically, the kelim of Atzilus and the oiros of Atzilus, the 10 spheres, are in a state of Iyu v'chayei echad, Iyu v'gamay echad because they're in Adveikus. The Neshamas Yisrael come from kelim, and specifically they come from chitzonius kelim, and for the Kabbalists who are keeping score at home, they come from pnimius of chitzonius kelim, as opposed to malachim, who come from chitzonius of chitzonius kelim. You'll see how that's important momentarily. And therefore, even in Atzilus, Neshamas Yisrael are godly but distinctive. So the first thing is, Neshamas Yisrael, before they're created, they're godly. But even in their godly state and the godly world, they're not intimate with godliness in such a way that they forfeit their identity, but that their identity is a distinctive inyan of godliness. Now, in Atzilus, malachim, angels, are also godly. and obviously in Atzilus, Torah and mitzvahs are also godly. So let's speak about three things. Torah and mitzvahs are godliness in Atzilus, Neshama Yisrael are godliness in Atzilus, and Malachim are godliness in Atzilus. The difference is the godliness of Torah and mitzvahs is dveikus, the godliness of Neshama Yisrael is godly in Atzilus, but there's a concept of Yotzu v'nifradu within Atzilus itself. The godliness of Malachim is also godliness. But when the Malachim are going to come into the worlds of Bria, Tzir, and Asiya, they're going to stop being godly, they're going to cease being godly, and they're going to become a Bria or a Metzias, because they come from what's called Chitzonius HaKelim, or more precisely, Chitzonius of Chitzonius HaKelim. Now here's where Neshamas get very, very interesting. If you could divide the reality into three parts, and I mean not the godly reality of Atzilus, but the lower worlds, it would be Torah mitzvahs, Neshamas Yisrael, and everything else. Torah mitzvahs are godliness down here. That's all there is to it. They're in a dveikus and elakus, and even through what's called Eira Neshama, even down here they're davik and elakus. Creation is yesh. Malachim may have been godly in Atzilus, but when the Malachim step over the threshold from Atzilus into Bria, they're yesh. Yesh means that they have an ego. In other words, the center of the reality of an angel is not God. The center of the reality of an angel is itself. What about Neshamas? Neshamas are both. Neshamas are godly, and the Neshamas are self-contained. The expression that underscores the reality of a Neshama is, quote, Elakus Shenasa Nivra, how godliness becomes a creation. Now, godliness and a creation are as opposite in fire and water, because godliness means bittul, godliness means no time and no space, godliness means no form. Creation means yesh, self-centricity, time and space and form. A neshama is both. A neshama exists in time and space, a neshama has a form, a neshama has an ego, and the truth of the soul is total bittul to Hashem. To say this in more meaningful and deeper words, remember that Neshamas Yisrael have free will. Now, free will is a dichotomy in itself. Because on the one hand, free will by definition is a godly attribute. Only God has free will. If any creation has free will, they've gotten it from God. At the same time, in order to be free, to exercise free will, you have to be distinctive. You have to be separate from God. And it is that unique space in the framework of creation that the neshama occupies. It's a nivra on its periphery, on its outside. It continues to be a lakus in truth. And because it continues to be a lakus in truth, it has the freedom to exercise choice and free will in as much that it is a nivra. So Kabbalah says, neshamas go through a process of becoming creations. We call it ibur, a gestation, a pregnancy, a process by which neshamas that started out as being batal to Hashem, they started out as being godly, should evolve, should develop, should change, should metamorphose into beings who have a self-centricity, an ego, and a freedom to choose, and so forth and so on. And at the same time, their real reality is that even as independent beings, they're still godly. And the mysticism of this, and I don't have time for the long version of it, is that we come from vessels, kelim. Kelim of Atzilus, we're lakus, but they're called dveikus, built-in ikeres. We're connected to Hashem in a way that it's not evident on the outside. It's not an interactive type of a dveikus. The elaborate and intricate and involved explanation of this you're going to have to save for another time and perhaps for another teacher. But this is what's unique about a neshama. The Neshamas Yisrael started out as godly. So did Torah and Mitzvah, so did Malachim. The Neshamas Yisrael come into the lower worlds and they fill a very unique niche. Torah and Mitzvahs remain godly even in the lower realms. Malachim and all the rest of the creations are yesh, they're separate, they're egocentric, they're inexact, they're separate from Hashem. The Neshamas Yisrael is both of the above. On the one hand, they have an independence, which is the basis for their free will, which means on the outside they appear to be yesh, not batal to Hashem, and at the same time they're godly. And in truth, it is the fact that they continue to be godly, even in the lower realm, that gives them the free will, which is the basis for their existence as separate from Hashem, yet servants of Him. And that's what this Maamar talks about. This Maamar is going to discuss the phenomena, the concept of the birth of a soul. Before a soul is born, it's batal to Hashem. After the soul is born, the soul becomes a an entity unto itself. And in truth, the real truth of the matter is that the separate entity of the neshama is actually a deep expression of its godly identity. So, I reckon our introduction has been sufficient. It's been quite long. So without any further ado, let us delve into the Maamar. But keep in mind that we talk about things that remain godly even in the lower realm, namely Torah mitzvahs. We talk about things in the lower realm are totally separate from Hashem, namely souls, angels. And the unique place in the framework of creation that a neshama holds, that it is simultaneously separate from Hashem and godliness at the same time. And here we go. Line 1. Hayam Raah Vayanos. The sea saw and ran away. Haharim raktu, while the mountains danced, ka'elim, like rams, v'chulu, and so forth. This is in the Tillim. It's the psalm that begins with the words B'tzeis Yisrael mi'Mitzrayim, when the Jewish nation left Egypt. Of course, there were many, many miracles. And the David HaMelech, King David, describes that when all of these miracles occurred, the various creations in God's world responded. And he describes how the mountains and the hills respond by jumping up and down with great joy. While the sea describes, it reacts by running away. Now, of course, the running away of the sea is what we would call the splitting of the sea. But if you read these biblical passages from Sefer Tillim, the impression that you get is that the revelation of God is, so to speak, good for some and not good for others. The mountains seem to celebrate it, and the sea seems to be overwhelmed by it. And that's what this Maamar explores. Why? The question is why? The mountains dance, Hayam Raah Vayanos, well, the sea escapes and runs away. And the answer is going to be, I'm terrible at keeping secrets, so I'm not even going to try. The mountains are godly. So when there's a revelation of godliness, they become more godly. The sea isn't godly. And when you have too much revelation of godliness, it's overwhelming. That's going to be the short insight of this Maamar. And of course, it's going to be linked to the phenomena of the birth of Jewish souls. But let's continue. The Shalah, in his classic work, the Shalah, in the section which talks about Pesach, he explains why the mountains dance while the sea escapes. Ki hanisahu, he interprets the phenomenon of running. It's haveda meyira. It's the idea of serving Hashem out of awe, out of fear. V'harikadhu, or the dancing of the hills and the mountains, who haveda meyava, represents the service of Hashem out of love. In other words, v'hu bechinas sad or bechinas eved. Two types of people have a relationship with a king. One is an officer, one is a minister, and the other is a simple servant. Their reactions to the king are various. The officer, the minister, reacts to the king with joy and engagement, while the servant, the simple servant, when he sees the king, reacts to the king with awe and fear and trepidation and so forth. V'hinei, b'hizgalas hamelech, when the king appears, so the minister and the officer who's intellectually in tune with his king and so forth, whose relationship with his master is based on joy and optimism and being full, is happier still. Which explains the mysticism why the mountains. And he says the Kabbalah, which are the divine attributes of Atzilos, which is the source of the root of the Jewish souls, that are called brothers to the Eibishter, to God Almighty, like a minister or an officer in the presence of his king, therefore dance. While a slave or a simple servant, his entire relationship with his master is based on a sense of being intimidated and fear. When the king appears, it frightens him off. The awe and fear is going to increase. And this explains that Hayam, the sea, which is the source of being a servant who is separate and submitted to his master, it's Raah, he saw the great revelation of Hashem, of godliness, Vayanos, and it escaped, V'geimid, and so forth. In other words, two people experiencing something beyond themselves. One is drawn into it and the other is overwhelmed by it. The Sod is drawn into it, the Eved is overwhelmed by it. The mountains, which are parts of Atzilus, are raised up by this great revelation, and the sea, which represents the separateness of godliness, as our Maamar is going to explain, is crushed by it. Line 10. Let's explain this pasuk and the commentary associated therewith. It says, let's talk about the seventh day of Pesach. Now what happened on the seventh day of Pesach? God Almighty split the sea. And Kabbalah adds that in addition to the concept and significance and meaning and worth and value of Kriyas Yamsuf, which we talked about in the earlier Maimorim and the earlier classes, Shu Gamken Inyan Leidus Hanshamas. The seventh day of Pesach is the day of the birth of Jewish souls. V'zeu Shakosov, and it's indicated in the biblical passage. U'bnei Yisrael, the sons of Israel, Holchu Bayabasha, walked on the dry land, and the connotation of walking on the dry land means they came into what we would call Almadis Galya, the lower worlds, where godliness is hidden and therefore the world is revealed. B'toich Hayam, he translates by passing through the sea. By going through the sea, you emerge on the dry land. So the concept is that in the seventh day of Pesach, neshamas are going to be born in the lower worlds that are going to have a separateness from God Almighty, as is illustrated by that pasuk, Holchu Bayabasha. Now, I don't want to give you long speeches, and I'm not qualified to give you long speeches, but in Chassidus there's all different types of neshamas. There's brothers, there's a wife, there's a son, there's a daughter, all kinds of different neshamas. Here he mentions Achav brothers and friends, which is a very high madrega neshamas. The most basic point is that all neshamas Yisrael in Atzilus are godliness. It doesn't make a difference what their level is. There is a concept which I want to share because I find it compelling, that we say as a rule that neshamas come from kelim. There are neshamas that come from oir and perhaps Ashbi, and this is what we say in Tanya chapter 19. Neir ad Hashem nishmas adam, and we don't use the mashal of the cup or the wick, which is the typical way we use a candle as a mashal for a neshama, but we use the fire, which is oir. And there's discussions about this in Chassidus at length. Now was not the time for it. So there's different levels of neshamas. It seems to me that what this Maamar is talking about, those neshamas who even in Atzilus are connected to kelim, chitzoni is a kelim, so that when they're going to come into this world, they're going to be truly separate from Hashem. And therefore in Atzilus, they may be called God's brothers, they may be called God's friends, but they're never ever in a state of even the way they're godly in Atzilus, there is a certain degree of separateness from the Ein Sof, like I explained to you before. And now we continue on line 12. The idea is as follows. The original source of Jewish souls is in Hashem's thought. And of course, as Maamar Hayam Raah, this means Bechinas El Yoynei Sheva Machshava. This is not the ordinary thought of Hashem. This is the very highest levels of Hashem's thought. And there's Grad Maimorim, a Pesach Dika Maimir, Vayema Yeshua, I think it is. Tafshin Chav, if I'm not wrong. It's a Maimir in Tafresh Nun Zayin. A pretty long Maimir, where he discusses a whole bunch of Madregas of Yisrael Olav Machshava, higher and higher still. But Yisrael Olav Machshava means Yidden are rooted in a very high level, what we call Chelik Alakami Mamash. But the neshama then goes through a chain reaction of worlds, and it comes into Hishtalshlus, and it exists in Atzilus. And in Atzilus, continues the Maimar, and he says, V'oz nikrayim achim v'reim l'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're called the brothers and friends of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu means God. But in the framework of Kabbalah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like you know from the Bar Mitzvah Maimar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu means Zohar Malchus of Atzilus. Godliness in Atzilus. Kadosh means the higher Madrege, Baruch means the more manifest Madrege. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu means the godliness of the 10 spheres. Now what we know about the godliness of the 10 spheres is that they're they're attached to the Ein Sof, which is higher than Atzilus, in this state of Dvekis. Neshamis in Atzilus are their brothers and friends. They're not part of that Dvekis, but they're close to that Dvekis. What does it mean, brothers and friends? Since the idea of Kodesh Brichu, who means the level of divine light, which is manifest in the vessels, in the attributes of Atzilus. Because if you wish to discuss the Ein Sof, which is outside the vessels, has nothing to do with the attributes. And therefore, since the godliness is higher than Atzilus, has nothing to do with the attributes. It's inappropriate, it's incorrect, it's inconceivable to speak about godliness higher than Atzilus and apply to it Kriyas Shem Klal and give it a name, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only when the godliness is manifest in Atzilus can you give it a name. And then its basic name is Havaya, Yudas Chochma, Heyabina, and so forth. For the Kabbalists who, of course, are keeping score at home, the technical way it works is that in Atzilus, the light is Havaya. And the Kalim have 10 different names. That Kesed is Ekya, and Chochma is Ko, and Bina is Hashem B'Niket Elakim, Kel is Chesed, Elakim is Gevura, Va is Teferes, and so forth and so on. You can look in the Shari from the Rabbi Yossi Chiklai. It tells you which name of the Eibishter corresponds to which one of the Esespheres. So the godliness of the light is Havaya, the godliness of the vessels is the 10 names, and according to Kabbalah, what brings together the light and the vessels is what's called the Nikud. The Havaya, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is the light, can be spelled with different vowels, with komats, with patach, with tzedei, with segel. And this is how in the light you have what's called Gavanak Heli, the beginning of being able to go into the vessels. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu means godliness as is manifest in the vessels of Atzilus. Now, any person who's at all tasted Pnimiyas HaTorah, Chassidus and Kabbalah knows that the central point in all of the discussions is the world of Atzilus. Without a doubt, it's the single most important concept in Kabbalah. And the reason Atzilus is so important, because Atzilus means Gilui Elokus, revelation of godliness. Now, godliness is whatever godliness means. You look up for homework. Revelation of godliness means the availability of the light of God to something other, to Azulas, and namely the vessels of Atzilus. Higher than Atzilus, the revelation of godliness obliterates the Azulas. It in effect bittles the Keli so they don't exist. And if you shine a light into a vessel and you destroy it, you haven't shined a light. You've just destroyed and raised the vessel up. Atzilus is the perfect Kabbalistic world because the light shines into the vessel stands its ground, and the light is shining into those vessels. Gili Elokus. This is important for many reasons. And most ultimately, it's important because the notion of Gili Elokus and Atzilus is the precursor for Gili Elokus Lamata. Since there is a place where the light of Hashem can shine to Azulas, ultimately this place can also be a space where the light of Hashem can shine to Azulas. So Atzilus is very, very important. So when you talk about Ein Sof by itself, Ein Sof by itself has nothing to do with anything, has no revelation, has no form, has no definition, has no name. Godliness in Atzilus is where light meets vessels, the vessels stand their ground, the light reveals itself into the vessels. This is where you can speak of the divine names. That's really, so to speak, at the center of all of Chachmas HaKabbalah. So the Neshamas and Atzilus are the brothers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Neshamas of Atzilus are the brothers and friends of the 10 Sfiras of Atzilus. That doesn't make them the 10 Sfiras, it makes them the buddies of the 10 Sfiras of Atzilus. The difference ultimately is that the 10 Sfiras of Atzilus have this dveikus, like I mentioned earlier, while the Neshamas Yisrael do not. But don't worry about it. The Neshamas and Atzilus are godliness. And so are angels. Angels are going to become yesh in the lower worlds. In Atzilus, everything is godly. V'hine, line 16. The 600,000 Jewish souls, or the 60 myriad as it's called. Which are rooted in the 600,000 letters of the divine thought. Are brothers to Kodesh B'richu. Shehem, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu? HaKadosh Baruch Hu means godliness, which is shining into the vessels of Atzilus, Hamidas. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes, in this Maamar, a code word for godliness that is manifest in vessels. But the light and the vessels of Atzilus are in a dveikus of Iyavachayechad Niyavagamayechad. The Shamas Yisrael are outside of that dveikus, but at least they're close to it. They're a lakus in Oifen of Metzias that are Yotzav and Nifrit. Okay, so Neshamas Yisrael, Jewish souls, as they exist in Atzilus, or as the Maamar here calls it, as they exist in Hashem's thought, are pretty holy. And it's not just that they have a degree of servitude or bittul to Hashem, they have no identity. Their whole reality is that they're expressions of godliness. For example, when a person thinks, the ideas that they're thinking are not separated from themselves. A person thinks an idea. That the letters of that thought are fused, are one with the person and with the ideas that the person thinks. So while you're thinking and you're focusing on an idea, the fact that in order to have that idea you need words and form is completely inconsequential because of the idea. When a person is thinking about something which arouses a certain passion, the passion is so predominant that the fact that you're experiencing that passion by thinking thoughts or words or images is quieted. So therefore in Atzilus, the light of Atzilus shines into the so-called vessels of Atzilus, which are the equivalent of Hashem's thought. Not only is the light of Atzilus godliness, the vessels of Atzilus are godliness. And this is an interesting idea, that we hold that the vessel's godliness is not just because of the light, the vessel's godliness is because of their own shame, because they have their own direct relationship with the Eibishter. And on top of that, in addition to the vessels of Atzilus being like a thought that's totally bottled to a light, which is the light of the Ein Sof, they're in a state of which means they're connected to a dveikus, nikeres, with a godliness which is higher than Atzilus. And the Shamas Yisrael, they're brothers and friends. Which means to say the Shamas and Atzilus are also godly, but the Shamas and Atzilus are not in a dveikus of they're just the brothers and friends of the Esesphirus of Atzilus. Line 20. Now this soul needs to be created as a self-contained, independent entity. As I've told you so many times in the past, that the proper translation of the word yesh means an independent entity, an entity whose center is self, in other words, has an ego. So malachim are going to become yesh in the lower worlds as well, but malachim have real egos. A neshama has and doesn't have. It's algus, shenasa nivra, as I explained to you in the introduction. Leyes b'bchinas nivra, to be a creation, shu b'chinas nifra, that should be distinctive and separate, me'ayin mamish, that it should go from a non-existential state, in other words, from a lack of self-centricity, which is called ayin, into a self-contained self-centeredness, which is called yesh. Shadei b'yesh abatzilus. Why is it in Atzilus? Mamish, it was godliness, mamish, in its proximity to the Esesphirus. It's the brothers and friends of Kodesh B'richu. Because to be short, even referring to the souls and to the vessels as a thought versus an idea, a light, is just a metaphor. Because in truth, Hashem's thought is different than our own. So the unity of the vessels of Atzilus and the light of Atzilus, which is Kelim and Noir, and the unity of the Shamas Yisrael in Atzilus, and the light of Atzilus, which is Machshava and Noir, is deeper than the typical Machshava. Now there's a mashal brought in Maamar Chassidus that explains the difference between the bittul of Kelim to Ein Sof and the Shamas to Ein Sof. And the difference is like a person is thinking about himself and a person who is thinking about somebody else. The light is the idea. The letters of thought are the vessels. When a person thinks about themselves, they are themselves. So the unity of the idea and the visual, the image, the form of themselves is very, very unified. When a person is thinking about somebody else, that somebody else is a separate entity. But you're thinking of that somebody else and that separate entity in your own imagination. So as they exist in your own imagination, they're part of your imagination. But because it's a part of your imagination, which is involving something else or somebody else in a very, very refined and subtle way, it's not the same level of unity. And of course the nimshal is the kelim of Atzilus. The letters of Atzilus are one with the light of the Ein Sof of Atzilus more than the neshamas are. But nevertheless, neshamas and Atzilus are godliness. And then the Alter Rebbe continues and he says, who? Line 22, how was a neshama going to now become a yesh? Through the attribute of the divine kingship, shehi hanikra levush, that malchus is relatively speaking called a garment in comparison to all of Atzilus, and by the virtue of the fact that it's a garment, its function is lahalim ulahaste, to hide and to block, to provide the possibility for it to be a self-contained entity. Now remember, when you go into Bria, the next world, and the worlds beyond that, Malachim are totally separate, Terebits are still totally Davik. It's the Neshama that's interesting. It's a Lakus Shenase Nivra. It's a creation, time, space, self-centricity, and form, limitation, in other words. And at its core, at its essence, it continues to be godliness, which is the basis for the free will, it's the basis for the quality of Mesiras Nefesh, and I can talk on and on and on and on. the process by which a neshama is created, that in place, instead of its being a brother to Kodesh B'richu, godliness and atzilus, in as much as neshamas Yisrael are godly and atzilus, to become a yesh has to admit this on malchus. Because the attribute of malchus hides. It separates what's high from what's below. But the Pasuk says, when the Eibishter created the world, that Hashem Molech, when Hashem wanted to be a king over the lower worlds, Geyus Lavish, he puts on a garment of gaiva, of arrogance. Kemidas hamalchu amlucha, the attribute of malucha, hi halavush, it's a garment, hagedim liyasavas hayesh, which is the basis for the creation of the lower worlds in a way that makes them independent and separate. A king's relationship with his subjects is one of aloofness, one of gaiva, one of arrogance, one of hisnasos, distance. Because a king's relationship with his subjects is one of removal, the actual interaction, the actual gift, in other words, the practical giving of the king to his subjects is very far removed from the aloofness of the king. I'll explain to you very simply. If I do an act of kindness, behind kindness is love. Love, which is the emotion, and kindness, which is the deed, they're very close. If I do an act of judgment, so anger or judgmentalism and the punitive behavior are very close. If a king gives to his subjects, the emotion is one of distance, of aloofness. The gift is a practical act. So the distance between the emotion of Melucha and the Pu'ula of Melucha is much greater. And that's the basis for why Malchus creates Yeshus. Malchus gathers all the godly lights and keeps them up, Remus, exalted, indirectly involved in the external aspect of Malchus, which gives. And as a result, since the Pnimis HaMalchus separates itself from the Chitzonius HaMalchus more than any other Sfira, the Chitzonius HaMalchus can become the basis at the beginning of Yeshus. Ki ein melech b'lai am, you cannot have a king without a nation. Now, of course, part of that is that's the aloofness of the king that creates that possibility. But on the other hand, you can't have a king without a nation means what? Am is translated in Chassidus meloshen oimabois, which means to say weak. You can't be a king over 1,000,000 geniuses or 1,000,000 children, as the Alter Rebbe is going to say momentarily. You can be a king over subjects, people who are human, like yourself. Am loshen imay, so they have free will. But am loshen imay, they're much lower than yourself. That allows you to be involved with them from this aloof space. And it's the aloofness of the king that creates the identity of the subject. It creates the independence of the subjects, the possibility for the subjects to truly be servants of the king, because although the king gives them commands and gives them instructions, but because he so separates himself from them, he gives them that space. That's the meaning of the phrase, Ein melech b'layam, you can't be a king without subjects. The subservience of the subjects of the king makes the king a king, and the aloofness of the king creates a framework, or permits the subjects to have a self-identity. Subjects have to be separate. Over individuals that are distinct, separate, with their own self-identity, can you rule. To be aloof over them. And the subjects, they're going to be in a state of awe. If a person has 100 children, or 10,000 children, or 1,000,000 children, he can't be called a king. In other words, if you live in a kingdom, and there's a king, but there's a guy in that kingdom who was a childhood friend of that king, and he grew up with him, and they're buddies, and he's as intelligent as the king, he's going to have a very hard time being a subject. Perhaps it's going to be impossible to be a subject, because he's too close. The basis for the kingship is distance. And metaphysically, this distance between the king and the subject is the basis for creating the identity, the separate identity of the subjects, which is, in mystical terms, the beginning of Yesh Mayayin. So think of it in these terms. Godliness is revealed in Atzilus. In as much as godliness is revealed in Atzilus, Atzilus cannot be distant from God. To the contrary, it's close to God. Malchus, on the other hand, because it's aloof from its relationship to what's outside of itself, even when Malchus gives the lower worlds, it gives the lower worlds in such a way which is not raising them up and including them in the godliness, but allowing them to be self-contained, to be yesh. He explains on line 27. Everybody knows this. Everything you have on the land, you have in the sea. You can't see them in the sea because the waters of the sea cover over them. Now, the land would be the lower worlds, the worlds of ego and independence. The sea would be Malchus of Atzilus. Says the Alter Rebbe, in a sea, which is Malchus of Atzilus, you have the potential, you have the beginning of everything that's going to exist in the lower world. It says in Chassidus, based on Kabbalah, that Malchus of Atzilus has many, many, many names. There are as many names of Malchus of Atzilus as there are individual creations in the lower realms, because each individual creation, all over the universe and all over the so to speak, the collective cosmos, including the mystical realms, are individually represented in Malchus of Atzilus. The same is true on high. The divine letters in which Hashem spoke and said, "Let there be light." There should be an expanse of the heavens. Kol elements which sustains all the worlds. Heim b'Atzilus, they begin in Atzilus. And of course, in Atzilus, those letters and those words, which are the basis for creation, are still a Likus. And when they come into Malchus, which is called the sea, Malchus, which is Malchus, Machas Aleim, covers over them, Bilti as Galalin Evroim, that the light of these creations should not be revealed to the creations. Hamishav and Mehem, which are created by them. So Malchus acts, in effect, as a separator. It keeps the higher aspects of the godliness to itself, so that the lesser aspects of godliness, which come into the lower worlds, come in such a way that the lower world should have a separateness. Because if the higher aspects of godliness, which Malchus retains and holds, would be revealed in the lower worlds, so the material world would become bottle into the spiritual realms. Like the bittel of the light of the sun in the sun itself. This is a very, very interesting mashal, and I believe that the fact that Alter Rebbe here uses the word b'moed, as he does in Sharichet Emunah Perek Yud, should create some questions, which I'm not going to get into. And the world would have no sense of self-identity and independence. When the source and the light are concealed, the worlds have their own identity. Similarly, the physical creation. If the godly light of Atzilus would be revealed, or if Malchus of Atzilus would be revealed, it would be nullified in its source, which is the spirituality, which is the basis for their creation. You cannot be self-contained and with your own form of neshama, an angel, a malach, and an angel. Shubachin is the fact that they're separate, and as I told you earlier, souls are separate and still godly, angels are separate and truly separate, and they are choosing to have a relationship with God Almighty through love and so forth. In other words, they are initiating a relationship with God as opposed to simply reacting to Him. It's only possible when the godliness is not revealed, but in a way that you can see it. Says the Alter Rebbe, this hiddenness and concealment, which provides the place of transition from where godliness is revealed and bittles everything, to where godliness is held back, so what comes through should be yesh, is Idea Malchus, is Malchus of Atzilus, Kizek Klal Gadol, to use a English, American cliche, everybody knows, Shah Malchus Yagir Emes. Malchus is the cause, Lias Bechenas Yesh Kanal, for the worlds below it to be created in an independent and a self-contained way. And it is therefore called the lower mother, Matanusa the queen, and the mother of sons, chapter 51. 36. So there's a mysticism here. The mysticism begins with there's a place called Atzilus. Atzilus is Gilui Elokus, the revelation of godliness. The revelation of godliness means that you have light of godliness and an other, namely the vessels. The light shines into the vessels receive the light doesn't destroy the vessels don't hide the light, so Atzilus becomes the perfect world. It's called the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And Atzilus has brothers. The Neshamas in Atzilus are brothers to the light in the vessels. They're not identical to the light in the vessels, they're brothers. Malchus of Atzilus acts as a container or a retainer. It's a sea. It holds all the fluid within itself. What passes through to the opposite side is so diminished that it creates the process and the concept of yeshus. Now let's go back to the discussion of souls specifically. Line 36. The notion that a soul has to be created and born. What does that mean? A body has to be created and born. It takes 9 months for a single-celled zygote or essence point, which is the beginning of a child, to fully divide repeatedly over and over and over again, and then, of course, to diversify until you have a complete child, in the words of the Tanya, with hair, nails, and skin. The soul goes through a similar process. And a very significant aspect of that process is not just taking on a form, but taking on a sense of separateness, a sense of ego. Where does this gestation take place? In Malchus of Atzilus. It's the uterus, it's the rechem of the creation. It's the place where things cook, so that they will be manifest in the next world as entities that are self-contained and individual. But what is the place of the neshama's gestation in B'malchus and Malchus of Atzilus? And now the Alter Rebbe gives you the mysticism. On the 8th day of Pesach, we make reference to the mentioning coming down of rain. And that's the moment at which the souls that are going to be born during the subsequent year are conceived, and they're implanted in the uterus, they're implanted in Malchus of Atzilus. And they hesitate, they pause, they gestate there for 7 months. Ad Zayin Shal Pesach, till the 7th day of Pesach, which is Manalei, the time that they're actually born, fully complete. And just for the record, from Shmini Atzeres to Shvi Shal Pesach on a regular year is less than 6 months. It's 5 months and 29 days. Just don't tell that to anybody. This year is a leap year, Tafshin Ayin Aleph, so you have an extra month, so it's almost a complete 7 months. But this is considered 7 months. Is just as it is physically, is havas mahus velad, to produce a self-contained, self-centristic, in a positive way, child minatipa, from an original point, the original seed. There's a hesitation, there's a pause. For 7 months in the uterus of the female, because the child is not able to protect itself. During the duration of this time, it eats and drinks what its mother eats and drinks. And it acquires a life which is its own. That this process produces yesh, a child who's not tethered to its mother physically or psychologically, but is a self-contained being. The same process occurs in Jewish souls that all begin in Atzilus, that in Atzilus shebechinas ayin. It has no self-identity, it's a brother and a friend of the Ein Sof. For it to be created as a self-contained entity, it must hesitate, it must gestate in the rechem, in the uterus of the female, of Malchus. And it hesitates there for 7 months. It eats and drinks, or the equivalent thereof in mystical terms. In other words, that it draws higher lights, but in such a way that this neshama is going to be born into Bria, not as a revelation of Atzilus, but a self-contained entity. Now let's talk, straight talk, okay? A couple knows they're going to have a baby. And you get 9 months' notice. Bottom line is, I know this is my own personal experience, and I can't imagine that anybody has had a different experience. The moment of birth remains a miracle. You know it's coming, you know it's coming, you know it's coming, but the idea that first there was a child in utero and a rechem, and now there's a child, is an incredible experience. Now you can, chalk it up to psychology and to human sentimentality, and it doesn't have any real biological and scientific significance, big deal, a moment before, a moment after. We can argue these things, and I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm sure it's not so simple. There are plenty of arguments to the effect that the difference between an unborn child and a born child is very, very, very significant. But certainly psychologically, the moment of birth is considered a miracle. In other words, as much as you're prepared, it's a total surprise. When Chassidus and Kabbalah talk about the gestation and birth of a soul, they have a similar idea. That notwithstanding the fact that this soul's been cooking, been gestating for 7 months, its birth has continued, a spontaneous event of a miracle that requires a special power. So 7 months, the baby gestates, the neshama is gestating, but when the moment of birth occurs, something very potent must be added to the mix to make it actually occur. You know, there's a mashal in Chassidus called Schwindel Trepp. Schwindel Trepp is a spiral staircase. And I have shared this mashal with you, I believe, in earlier classes. For another context, for Ponim and Acher, I'm not going to get into it now. But one of the ways the mashal of a spiral staircase is used is to illustrate the notion of a surprise. You know, a person's getting closer and getting closer and getting closer, and you don't see them. It's not like a person climbs a flight of stairs, you see them coming up the stairs. The person is going on a spiral staircase, you don't see them until they're upon you. It's called chiddush, a novelty, a newness, a surprise. Birth sneaks up on you, although you're expecting it, in such a way that the actual event and moment of birth is a surprise. It's exciting, it's radical, it's distinctive, it's very, very special. You know, I'll share with you a poignant thought, and perhaps others would say that I'm best to leave it alone. The Rebbe spoke Chavches Nissen, Tavshin and Aleph, the Sikha that he said after Pesach in 1991, where he so passionately talked about, he showed us his own pain, how much he needed Mashiach and how much we didn't care about what he needed. And he used, amongst other things, expressions such as, everything I've done in my life has been lahevel v'larik. Lahevel means for nothing, because Mashiach hasn't come, which is quite unsettling to Hasidim, and if we may say so, it's absolutely not true. The Rebbe is one of the most accomplished men in all of human history, Jewish history for sure. So what does that mean? Everything I've accomplished with lahevel v'larik. It's like, you know, you follow a pregnancy to the moment before birth, and you don't deliver the baby. It's about the deliverance. It's about the moment of birth. So the pregnancy is meaningful, obviously, biologically. When we talk about a soul's gestating in Malchus of Atzilus, the pregnancy is meaningful mystically, spiritually. It's taking on a form that will allow it to become a yesh. The moment of birth is a miracle. The moment of birth is the moment of severing its link to its source and becoming self-contained, a distinct and a separate entity. A little story, just a little story, which I think is connected. The Tzemach Tzedek was a boy. How old? 2, 3, 4. And he was sitting on Alter Rebbe's lap. Alter Rebbe, of course, had a weakness for his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, especially after his mother had spiritually sacrificed her life that Alter Rebbe could live on, as we know the story. And the little boy was sitting on his grandfather's lap, and he was playing with his grandfather's nose, and he was saying, Zayde, Zayde, affectionately saying, grandfather, Papa. So the Alter Rebbe said to the smart little boy, this is not the Zayde, this is the Zayde's nose. So he grabbed the Alter Rebbe's beard, he said, Zayde. And the Alter Rebbe said, this is not the Zayde's board, this is not the Zayde, this is the Zayde's board. So he grabbed one of his payas, and he grabbed one of his eyebrows. Anyway, the Tzemach Tzedek lost round one. He couldn't find his grandfather. He found his beard and his eyebrows and his nose and his payas and his yarmulke, but he couldn't find him. But of course, the Tzemach Tzedek was not an easy defeat, an easy resigner. So he climbed off his grandfather's lap, went into the other room, he waited a few minutes, and he made a smash, like as if something had fallen and broken, and he starts to scream in panic, Zayde, Zayde! And Alter Rebbe gets out of his seat and dashes into the next room to see what happened to his grandson. And the little boy comes out from behind the couch and says, oh, it is the Zayde. I found my Zayde. You can't deny it. I called Zayde and the nose didn't show up, the beard didn't show up, the eyebrow didn't show up, the Zayde showed up. What the story brings out, it has many, many meanings. Of course, it's a very profound story. But part of it is the novelty, getting to the core, getting to the heart of the matter. Birth has that magic. And Kabbalah says that the magic is not only psychological, it's actual. The idea that there's an incredible difference between 1 minute prior to birth and the moment subsequent to birth is not only our perception. Because birth is a separate miracle. Conception and pregnancy is a miracle. Actually, surviving and being born is a miracle unto itself with a special potency that comes directly from Hashem to affect this culmination, this conclusion. Now, I'm terrible at suspense, so I'll share this with you. The Mittel Rebbe has a Maamar, of course, based on this Maamar in the Shara Emunah, and he makes reference to an animal that's called Oifer HaAyolim. It's a type of a ram, and in our Maamar he mentions Ayolim as well. Oifer HaAyolim is an incredibly narrow uterus. So it says in Chazal that it's biologically incapable of delivering a baby. It can't happen. The rechem is tzar, the child cannot be born. Now, of course, the child is not going to be born. The baby will die, and the mother could die. So it says in Chazal that Hashem sends an akrav, some kind of a scorpion, to bite the ayol in the place where the baby has to be delivered, and it allows the rechem to expand, and the baby is delivered. This is a mashal for Chevlei Mashiach. You go through 2,000 years of Galus, virtual 2,000 years of Galus. And, we're cooking. We're going someplace, right? Galus is compared to sleep, and Galus is compared to a pregnancy. What happens in a pregnancy? All kinds of change takes place. Nobody could see it. And as far as I reckon, there's no such thing as metaphysical, mystical ultrasound. Until the moment of the birth of Mashiach, the first moment of Galus and the final moment of Galus seem the same. And then Mashiach is born, and it's a new world. But there's the event of birth itself. And the event of birth itself is not only a technicality. There's a special power from Hashem that allows for this miracle of birth and newness to emerge. Like the akrav that bites the oifer ha'yolim to allow it to deliver its young. So it isn't only that birth is a surprise to us, but there's a special gift from Hashem that allows the miracle of the delivery of birth to take place. And that's Shvi'ah Shel Pesach. Shvi'ah Shel Pesach is not simply the development of the soul. It's delivering the soul as a self-contained entity, a yesh in Elam Abriya, as I told you at the very beginning of the class, that doesn't have Ruach HaKodesh, that chooses to serve God voluntarily and its own volition. So go to the text, line 42. V'hinei, B'zayin Shel Pesach Oleides HaNeshamas. On the 7th of Pesach, souls are born. Va'in explains the Rebbe, ki b'chteish ye b'chinas leid o psichas harechev, for that to be birth in the opening of the uterus. Liyes haneshama yitzas min helam legila, that the soul should emerge from its concealed state, where it's hidden in the sea of Malchus of Atzilus, still in some kind of a way in a godly space. Legile, to emerge into a revealed, ungodly, self-centered condition. And I don't mean self-centered like a spoiled little child. I mean the self-centered, that they have free will, that they're going to exercise in serving Hashem. A special energy has to be infused in the Malchus of Atzilus, which is Milamayla Me'ishtashus, whose origin and source is higher than the entire chain reaction of worlds. In other words, Malchus is the lowest level of Atzilus, which is why it does the separation, keeping the godliness to itself, producing a yesh on the outside. But the moment of transference, where the yesh actually departs from Malchus of Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus can't deliver. Malchus of Atzilus can gestate, can cook, can develop the unborn soul, but the actual deliverance of that unborn soul from its being included in the yam of Malchus to being a self-contained yesh and Atzilus in Bria has a koyach itself a save of Kalaman, higher than all of Kutchabrichu, all of Ishtashel. Skip the parenthesis, line 46. As the Torah describes, Hashem drives the sea to split it so there can be birth. Beruach kadamaz, with an easterly wind which is powerful. Now, kadam means east, but kadam also means before. That the power that splits the sea comes not before the sea, before Malchus, but before all of Atzilus. Within the framework of the chain reaction of the worlds. From ideas to feelings, to thought and to speech. It's impossible to produce from any level of ayin, of non-existentialism, of bittul, to become a self-contained, separate, egocentric being. In other words, even though Malchus of Atzilus' role is to create the possibility of yesh by gathering in all the godly lights and beginning the creation of process of creating beings that are going to be very separate from the godly lights, but to actually affect their delivery, their separation from Malchus of Atzilus requires the Keach Ein Sof from Seif of Kalaman. Elai de Gili Hadas HaSevev, line 48, only by revealing a light from Sevev Kalam, Shemakif Labiyah, which is higher than all of Ishtalshalos, Shekulam Shavim Kamei, they're all equal as far as it's concerned. V'zeu Shekos of Ruach Kodem. That's what it's called. Is that easterly wind? A primordial wind. A before time wind. Chulu. That's how the sea split. So the sitting of the Yam, splitting of the sea, is a metaphor for birth. The sea becomes land. In other words, where all things were included in godliness are now becoming distinctive, separated from godliness. So in Malchus, those things are formed, they're developed in the sea. Then the sea has to part and leave them over. Then they become, in fact, separate from godliness. The act of removing the godliness so that they be left over has to come from Ruach Kodem Aza, has to come from Sevev Kalaman. So it splits the sea. Because the sea, which is in the process of creating beings that are potentially separate, is part of Ishtalshalos. And therefore, its ability to produce beings that are meant to be separate is only theoretical. It produces the theoretical model of beings that are going to be yesh. But the actual yeshification, pardon my etymological license, of those beings is Giloy Ha'ora Shalamayla Me'ishtalshalos. You have to bring forth a light which is higher than Ishtalshalos. Hafach Miyam Liabasha, which transfers the sea to the land. In other words, it removes the sea and leaves over those beings that remain on the land as separate entities. Which is another explanation of the Zoharic statement that says, Matitzak Elai, when the Jewish people are crying, Hashem says, why are you screaming? Be quiet. This is up to Atik Yomim, which is Pnimius HaKesed. We talked about this in one of our earlier classes. From Kesed, from Atik, there's a power that something should actually be born in a self-contained, separated way. So, if the sea represents a uterus, the splitting of the sea is the moment of birth. And the power for the splitting of the sea has to come from Ein Sof, which is higher than Ishtalshalos. Now let me tell you a Kabbalistic rule. What happens when you shine a light which is very bright to a realm which is not usually accustomed to such a bright light? There's two possibilities. One, it'll be drawn in. The other, it'll be crushed. Now, the Kabbalistic rule is this. Godliness is drawn to godliness, which means any being that is godly, even if it's on a very low level, when you shine a higher light, it's nidbak, it's drawn into the higher level of godliness. Something which is ungodly, when you shine a bright light, it pushes it away. It crushes it. In other words, when godliness reveals itself in the world, those aspects of the world that have an innate and inherent godliness are drawn into it. Those aspects that don't are destroyed by it. Says the Rebbe, that's the difference between Hayam Raah and Hayam Raah Vayanos. The mountains dance, and the sea runs away, because the mountains goes on things which are godliness. You shine a higher light, they become more godly. The sea is the beginning of non-godliness. You shine a higher light, it crushes them. When this incredibly great light is revealed to permit birth, the mountains dance. Harim Chagas, the mountains represent the attributes of Atzilus. Ugvois, and the lower mountains, the hills, are either Chagas of Bria or Yehid Atzilus, the lower levels of Atzilus. Now, since they are godliness, higher than the godliness of Yam, whose whole function is to hide, to produce Yesh, they dance like Ye'elim. Ye'elim means rams. And as I told you before, that in the middle of the Rebbe's Maimorim, they link it specifically to Eifet HaYalim, to a ram that has such a narrow rechem that it requires a special miracle for them to deliver their offspring. When you shine an incredible light to save of Kalama Nichlalu, the attributes of Atzilus become raised up into that higher light. As a candle becomes included in a torch. In other words, that when Hashem shines a light of save of Kalama at the moment that the sea splits, so Sha'oid is the tikkun, the lights of Atzilus, Hamulabosh and Bekalim, which we reveal, they manifest in the vessels Nistalkum and Akelim, are raised above the vessels into the Ein Sof. They become included in the Yer Makav. V'agam shagam midei Shabbos b'Shabbat yesh aliyas ha'elamis. We know in Kabbalah that everything is very complicated. That on every Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe mentions it very briefly in Tanya chapter 39, that on Shabbos the worlds ascend, and the same is true on Yom Tov, and in times of davening and so forth. Any kind of ascent that takes place in a time-based way is still within the realm of order and gradualism. Asiya b'yetzira, yetzira b'briya, v'nika hiloch. So it may be growth, it may be ascent, but it's called walking, not jumping. Aval harikot, the leaping, the dancing, being described in our Maamar, hu aliyah gadol, which is an incredible ascent, and an abrupt ascent, shalei b'adraga klal, without any gradualism whatsoever. The hainu b'raseiv of canal, when you shine on a very powerful godliness, on a lower being, that's godliness, it's drawn into it. Kaya elim, like these rams, she'ein be'em das, they have no intelligence. V'sherish b'china zu l'mal me'adas, the basis for this energy comes from higher than das. Aval Hayam, continues the Rebbe, while the sea, since it's safe for the Kodagan, it's the end of Atzilus, and here already its function is Hamastin Umaylam, is the black hand to hide, although to itself the Yam is in hiding, the Yam is gathering the godliness, but it's gathering the godliness so that on the outside of the Yam there should be edits, there should be separated entities. Therefore it's theoretically connected to Yeshus, and Ukisharo Gilead Seviv, when you shine an infant light of Seva Kalaman down on the Yam, it cannot be raised up into the godliness. Like a light into a torch, as is the mountains, the higher aspects of Atzilus. His entire function is to create a hiddenness. Vayanos, he runs away. And what does the running away mean? He splits. Removing the concealment and delivering a neshama into Elam Abriya. Now, in relationship to Atzilus, that's a greater Helam. But in relationship to Bria, it's a Gili. Like, for example, a person. There's a whole chain reaction of steps, the mind, the heart, thought, speech, and so forth. Sometimes you get a jolt of enlightenment that comes from your subconscious, which is so powerful, and it makes you mute. You're incapable of speech, line 61 of Ishtik, and you go silent, because it's so powerful. So if you are sensitized to powerful jolts from your subconscious, you become excited and drawn into that light. And if you're not conditioned, it shuts you down. Which is what Moshe Rabbeinu was called Kvad Peh. He had a hard time speaking because he was so bottled to godliness. When people pray, they pray quietly, like it says in Zayis, there's also in the Gemara and Halacha and so forth. Why did all this happen? That the world of Atzilus is raised up, and Malchus of Atzilus is crushed. In other words, it's forced to split and produce its actual yesh. For the master who rules the world. Gilead Asev of Canaan, it's the revelation of an infinite light which is higher than Ishtashlos, who is so powerful that a Haifrei Hatzur, it transforms a rock into water, and from a flintstone that is usually accustomed to producing fire, to produce a aga, means a pond of water. Chalamish, which is a flint, produces water. Gevura becomes chesed, and his battle they lose their individual identities, and they become, if you will, exchangeable. How Hashem makes peace between one kind of angel and another kind of angel. It says that's what happens on Shvi Shel Pesach. God leaps, and it's without any initiation on our end. He jumps over the mountains, over Atzilus, and therefore the mountains of the godliness of Atzilus is drawn into this incredible revelation. And the Yam is split. And the splitting of the sea is not just the crushing of the sea, it's what allows for the neshamas to be delivered and Elam Abriya, born. So the way you should see it is that the seventh day of Pesach is Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. And what happens on that day is that Hashem shines a light from a much, much higher place to allow the already processed neshamas and malachim that are still included in the malchus to be delivered. By jolting the Yam, by breaking the Yam. Says the Rebbe Achach mitzvah Sfira, so then comes Sfira, which is Mem, Tes Yom, 49 days, Machas Shabbat, beginning day after Pesach, here the human being initiates. And the point is that by the time Shavuos comes, Hashem is again going to shine a light. And instead of crushing us, it's going to raise us up because we will qualify ourselves to receive it. When the Torah was finally given on Shavuos, we faced God face to face when the Torah was given, and He didn't crush us. So the idea that the light crushes us is because of a lack of readiness, and then we qualify and prepare and ready ourselves so that when Shavuos comes, we're actually drawn into the divine light. Now let's remember how this Maamar started. The Maamar started with a supposition of a Sar and an Eved, an officer and a slave, and argued that the officer is drawn in and celebrates the revelation of the king, and the Eved, the simple person, is crushed by it. Now if you think about this mashal in terms of real life, a very, very extreme revelation will come to you, and that is that real free will is dafka by the Eved and not by the Sar. Who can truly exercise free will? One who's truly separate. One who's in love with the king because he understands the king and the king understands him doesn't exactly have that kind of freedom and independence. So as a reality, it's the Eved Pashut that's born as a separate entity in the lower worlds, as opposed to a godly entity in the lower worlds is the one that's truly exercising free will, which is an unbelievable statement of encouragement and optimism to simple people, which is all of us. And in the language of the Basi Lagani, there may be a king, there may be generals, but the bizbuz ha'eitzris is for the Anshe Chayil HaPashut. The splurging of the divine treasure is for the simple soldier. That's us. And whether we are comfortable with this or not, in the Chabad model, where the Rebbe doesn't do the work for us, we have to do the work for ourselves, the Rebbe teaches us it's the Chassidim, the simple people, who bring Mashiach, and not the greater people.